All right, welcome to our HelioCon seminar series, brought to you by the Resource Training Education topic. I'm Rebecca Mitchell. I'm leading that topic and been hosting these seminars. So to give you a little background, HelioCon is a 5-year research effort led by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, partnering with Sandia National Laboratories, the Australian Solar Thermal Research Institute, and DOE's Solar Energy Technologies Office to develop and manage a national laboratory-led US consortium to support research, development, validation, commercialization, and deployment of low-cost heliostats for concentrating solar power and solar thermal applications. So before I introduce our speaker, just a few housekeeping things for this seminar. So as you heard, this is being recorded, and so this will be made available afterwards on the NREL Learning YouTube channel, which there'll be a link for in the final slides. I'll also make the presentation slides available afterwards. So far, I've just been emailing these out to our distribution list. Eventually, those will probably be put in a more permanent place online, but for now, I've just been emailing these out. Please stay on mute if you're not talking. And during the presentation, feel free to put questions in the chat, which we'll get to in the Q&A at the end, or when we get to the Q&A at the end, you can also go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question directly to Jeremy. So we should have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. All right, so with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker. Jeremy Sment is a mechanical engineer at Sandia National Labs. Jeremy focused on wind loading over heliostat fields and long-range flux mapping and calibration tools at the NSTTF for his graduate work through 2013. He rejoined the NSTTF in 2018 to support the Gen 3 particle pathway, where he is focused on thermal energy storage and the handling of solid particles and commercial scale particle system integration focused on tower design and techno-economic analysis. Jeremy joined the HelioCon effort in late 2021 and has conducted a series of interviews with industry experts to develop a high-level understanding of solar field deployments in the context of past lessons learned in current US energy market trends. Jeremy holds a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering at UNM. All right, with that, Jeremy, go ahead.
Thank you, Rebecca. Let me share my screen. Okay. Thank you all. I'd like to introduce my team too. Alex Zolan from NREL and Mark Spear also work with me on the field deployment task. So I will talk a little bit about the presentation outline. To give you an idea is we kind of have a very broad idea of field deployment. What does it mean? And so it's kind of all of the processes that surround the heliostat field. And so that begins with site selection. And then, once we find the site, we lay out the field optimization software like that. We talk about supply chain, bringing in heliostat parts, manufacturing, quality control, inspecting, receiving. We talk about capitalization, right? How do we get funding? How do we line that up for getting a deployment, getting an RFP selected, site preparation, preparing the field, assembly and construction, deploying each of the heliostats. Then we calibrate them, operation and maintenance ongoing through the life of the project, and then end of life. And so it's a very broad spectrum of what we talk about here. And so kind of the key question is how do we look at field deployment quantitatively? Because it's impossible to just simply look at field deployment without looking at the actual heliostat itself, right? The answer to all field deployment questions are, it depends, right? Are you looking at large heliostats, small heliostats? What's your ground like? What's your wind like? And so we kind of thought we'd tackle that by looking at it in 3 ways. So one is learning, this is just reductions in cost gained from experience, innovation, and learning from simply deploying more projects. The next is design innovations in the heliostat itself, right? This has crossovers to all of the other categories within the heliostat consortium. And how do those design changes reduce costs for deployment? And the next is process improvements that directly relate to one of those categories on the first slide there. So first, talking about learning curves, we have a study out by John Lillestam et al, and they looked at most of you have probably seen the NREL Solar Paces data sheet. It has all the concentrating solar projects in the world. It's a great database. If you haven't seen it, there's a link at the bottom here. We'll send that out. Anyway, they noted that the average PV learning rate has been about 20% since 1990. And furthermore, trough CSP shows learning rates exceeding about 25%. And so, but when you look at CSP's curve, it's constantly getting reset, and they break it into these kind of policy regimes, right? So this is a graph from Lillestam's paper that kind of has the SEGS plan over here. Then Spain kind of gets started and starts a new generation. And there's the kind of the boom in the US after the RF funding came in, and then some new projects here. So we kind of have a learning curve that's there. And I have another slide that I'll pick up on this. This is a picture or a graph of the cost versus life volume that Karup et al did in their new paper that just got released this year. And it shows how a piece part for a heliostat, once you make about 40,000 parts, you've reduced the cost to a point. And so I kind of just throw these high level, not to get into the details of these studies, but just to posit that learning is a big deal, and getting more projects is important. And that's a big part of the thrust that I'm going to be talking to today. Here's another graph I made out of the same data set. I was interested in looking at it in a couple different ways. So if you look down here, you've got a sequence of concentrating solar tower fields. They're all named here, and the year that they came about. And I wanted to see if we divided it by heliostat IP holder, if we see that. And so what you're seeing in the colors here is a capacity, right? I just wanted to control for capacity. It's not fair to compare Chile to Spain without noting that the DNI is just excellent in the Cerro Dominador. So I wanted to just kind of control for that, but also looking at developers. So this line here, this is Abengoa, and you can see that when their heliostats are used, you see a nice downward curve here. This is Sener here coming, just with these two big improvements between Hemasolar and NUR 3. Here's a bright source curve, and again, there's some differences in DNI, so that may not be exactly one-to-one here. And you've got the group of the Chinese deployments here, which don't necessarily follow the same trend exactly, also lower DNI. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting, and I wanted to put that out there as a way of showing that yes, I do think that we do see learning there. And so wanted to share that with you. So next section is cost reductions in heliostat designs, and how do these affect deployment costs in general. So one of the things is to look at this study. It's called commercial cost update, commercial and advanced heliostat collectors, and that's by Parthiv Karup, Chad Augustine, and Patrick Davenport. And I wanted to share this with you. I pulled this graph out of their paper, and they've done this really extensive study where they've kind of pulled apart itemized all these sub costs, right? So we see that when you go from a the Stelio design to the Sunring design, these two were chosen because we happen to have a lot of data and a lot of insight into the IP there. You can see that there were some reductions when you go from a large foundation to a simple ring with piles in the ground. There's some savings there. There's some savings in the site labor that it takes to install a large heliostat versus a small one. I don't know if you can see, this is about 3 by 8 meters here. For a human would be about to this height. I should have put the dimensions in, I apologize for that. You got some reductions in infrastructure. This one is solar powered with wireless. This one uses maybe it assumes a wired ground-based. So these are kinds of design-based features, but I also wanted to emphasize that they both assume that the economies of scale have been worked out and that we've gotten enough deployments of these to learn. And that really brings these down. So the costs, this is $127 per meter squared. This one's $96 per meter squared. And so to get there, we do need to make a lot of the heliostats. And we also want to look at directly just ways to make it simpler to put them in the ground. And so the deployment related costs, as you can see, save about $30 per heliostat between the two when you add them up. This is a little analysis I did on to figure out what are the direct field deployment cost savings. So if we look at the system advisor model, this is kind of a first pass at it high level. So the way I approached just getting a good look at it is said, okay, let's take the default power plant, right? Single tower power plant. And I'll just tweak one parameter and see what's the difference, right? So in no way is this meant to be, dollars in the bank. It's just a way of looking at what's the relative importance of various things. So I took the service life and I cranked it up from 25 years to 35 years. And I saw that the LCOE dropped about half a cent per kilowatt hour. And so I thought that's pretty significant. And I don't think that's unachievable either. I think that's actually something we could design to. Optimal resource. So I just kind of picked a site that had Blythe versus Daggett. And I just kind of looked at what is it when we kind of get a little bit better sun. And I saw, another half cent there. So I think the solar resource is extremely important. I probably could have taken it a step further and gone to Chile for the solar resources they have there. Reducing O&M costs. So I just kind of took it from the $66 default and brought it down by 20%. And saw that's about a quarter cent of LCOE. By the way, I mapped all these as to what the equivalent heliostat cost is, just because we are trying to reduce the cost as a specific objective. So I just have kind of a linear fit here to figure out the heliostat cost reduction equivalent. So this is, take these numbers with a grain of salt again. Deployment times. If we just look at the financing on 3 years of no revenue while paying on $1 billion of financing, that's a pretty significant hurdle to get over financially. And so I just noted that if we could reduce those deployment times, we could almost save, 0.17 cents. And then site preparation. So you've got a $16 assumed site preparation fee. And I thought, if we didn't prep the field, we just left it wild, maybe that's $10. That's that's a real stretch here. I don't have a lot of quantitative numbers on what exactly the cost is of site preparation, and so I'm assuming that a barren field is going to be significantly less, and that's something we'll be looking into through the HelioCon project over the next 3 years or so. Reducing soiling and land costs. I have another slide on that, but basically these are some kind of numbers to give you a feel of what are the actual savings that we could get from field deployment. And I think there are some pretty good, pretty sizable numbers when you add them all together. So let's talk about site selection. I kind of want to talk about it as we usually think of it like, okay, well, here's the sunny patch in the US, and we're going to need to think about solar resources, wind, do some weather studies, and then we might overlay the grid and say, okay, here's the best spots where we can actually tie to the grid. So we're going to need to be in those locations. And I wanted to kind of add another layer here. This is these are tribal communities, indigenous communities, and I wanted to kind of lay that out as to say that there's some opportunities here to engage with communities that are kind of living off grid maybe, or have an interest in these, or just kind of allowing for conversations with communities and indigenous led solutions. And I thought that was a really, getting involved early to see kind of like how do these work in with the land here. You can see that there's a lot of the opportunity for engagement there. Also politics. I got another slide on this, but I thought this is a new thing, and I think that this is something we need to talk about, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable. And Reuters did this study in this year, actually, just came out last week. It was a study by Wood Mackenzie, and they noted that 1.7 gigawatts of proposed solar capacity was canceled last year during the permitting stage. And they said there was 103 localities that block or restrict renewable deployments. There are, and then they mentioned that site acquisition is a top threat to growth. That quote came from the solar industry. And sociologists looked at it and they said, this solar and renewables is now the subject of a US culture war. And so for every single large scale solar project that's being proposed, you're seeing a very well organized opposition on social media. I think the groups last year alone, there were 35 new Facebook groups created to oppose renewable deployments. I'm not sure if that's specific to solar or just any renewable, but I know wind is also having these problems. PV is having these problems. And so it's not just a CSP problem. In fact, this really has happened after the last US CSP deployment. So some other lessons besides the political aspects there's some events where projects didn't get deployed because of a delay. And so Rice Solar Energy, we all remember that they did an environmental impact study on a specific endangered shrub, but by the time they got that figured out, the tax incentives, the investment tax incentive dropped from 30% to 10%. That was in 2012, a big policy shift there. Rio Mesa 2, they found fossils underlying a portion of it, so they couldn't get the field deployed because of a portion of it. So I put the comment modularity, right? Could we move around more and make it less vulnerable to specific, migration paths or specific portions of it? The Redstone project, not in the US, but it was, it had its power purchase agreement postponed since 2016 due to an energy surplus. So by the time they were able to actually deploy, their learning efficiency would have likely been reduced. And so that's another call for modularity, right? If you don't need this much power, how about this much? Can we get something going so that we have a stable demand, supply and demand chain? I think that's what we really need to think about. Opportunities might be to engage communities long before the proposal is due, right? So we can answer their concerns and build majority support. We'll talk about the timeline for responding to RFPs, and there's no time to really, go out and meet your neighbors. You've got 2 to 3 months to respond, and if you haven't already gotten the community interested in the opportunities of this investment, how do we participate? Are there jobs for us here? Is this going to hurt our environment? Is this going to be, most of these groups claim it's an eyesore, right? We don't want to see this tower. But if you engage early enough, you can answer these questions, and you're likely to be able to reasonably answer some of these things, right? It's a lot easier to wreck a sandcastle than it is to build it. And Facebook groups only need to create enough disruption for 2 or 3 months, and then the project's not going to go through. So I think the burden is on the developer to meet these communities early on. That ties a lot into DEI, right? We want equitable deployment of these renewables. We need those communities to be leading and speaking to developers about how that would affect them. This is another fact from Reuters. Their companies are paying up to $1,000 per acre, and that is up from about 200. So huge increase of what it takes to get people to buy into these. That's going to affect the bottom line for the land cost. So PR campaigns is an opportunity that build familiarity in CSP. I'm in engineering, so that's not my wheelhouse, but as an engineer, I'm looking for those economies of scale to get the costs where we need them to be. And so if we can't get these things deployed because of bad PR, right, then we need to address it. And so the things we see here, a lot of anchor bias. People heard that global warming is a hoax and renewables are just in it for the money, and there's availability bias. So the famous, I think you look at, there's a study out that says something like several million or billions of several million birds are killed every year by cats, but only a couple hundred were killed by concentrating solar towers. Yet people think of these as death rays that kill birds, and that scorched bird image, I think, really affected a lot of environmentalists who would be pro-renewable otherwise are questioning whether or not this is. So you have to kind of put out the new information, right? Is that a fixed problem? Well, we didn't hear about the fix. We just heard about the birds. Bandwagon effects, groupthink is big. And so getting enough information out there that people understand what's going on is really going to kind of keep people from being pulled into these groups based on inaccurate information. Also policy help at the state and federal level. I can't lobby as a as a government employee, but I can say, is this an emergency or not, right? If we need to get climate change solved, we need to get these renewables by 2030, 2050, whatever your goals are, we need these deployed, and we can't be, we need some kind of streamlined process that makes the investment work. And so another opportunity, again, modular plants with smaller footprints. The bigger the plant, the harder some of these logistical challenges are going to be. So talking about requests for proposals. These are, like as I said, they take about 2 to 3 months for complex projects, and all the development must occur in advance. So the developer needs to know, okay, here's my site. I know my solar resource. I know my wind data. I got my community support strategy, my land use and transmission. I know my water, my labor resources. All of that needs to be ready to go, right? The power production then is the next thing, right? So a lot of times plants have underperformed, and it's really important to show how the solar uncertainty, like due to increasing fires, right? If you have another map of the fire hotspots, and they're just right around that sunny belt there. So that's a big part of your predicted source, right? Flight paths from airports, condensation trails, dust types, right? Is it the kind of dust that sticks to the mirrors, or does it blow right off? The reliability case, that's a big one. I have another slide on that, so we'll talk about that. LCOE, O&M, capitalization plan, deployment time, all of this needs to be ready to go. And I think we'll be trying to help make some of these cases stronger with our efforts here. So as part of the research here, I had some conversations with some really smart people in the business, and I really appreciate all the time they shared with me. I missed one last question though at the end of all these interviews. I forgot to say, do you mind if I use your name? And so I'm going to kind of obscure some of the things they said so that it's not clear who or what they were talking about. But I will hopefully be able to circle around and get the, give them credit for their ideas here, because these are some great thoughts. So in the utility mindset, they're looking at 30-year-old aging plants that are coming down, right? We got coal going down, we got nuclear going down, thousands of megawatts are coming off the grid, and we need to replace this with new technology. So, we just need to drop it on the ground and have it work. We can't be worried about, did the project get permitted? Is there a single point of failure? Were there delays in the supply chain? It just needs to work for them, because they have, this is their top priority in their business, right? So the reliability and power production case really needs to overwhelm existing skepticism, because too many CSP plants have underperformed in the past. So right now, another quote, PV and battery is much more competitive than thermal storage. The market has evolved. So when people think of storage, they're starting to think of batteries, right? So Southern California Edison solicited about 4 gigawatts of storage over the next 4 years, and it's all going to be batteries. The reason, it's tested, it's modular, and it's proven. That's a quote. Speed is definitely a big deal. Battery supply is tough to get due to manufacturing bottlenecks. So the whole project cycle is currently taking 18 months for a battery project. By comparison, thermal energy storage and CSP is taking 24 to 36 months. So if we really wanted to be competitive, I would be looking at a 6 to 12 month deployment as a goal for this consortium to look at, how do we get something going? It doesn't have to be 100 megawatts, but how do we get something up in 6 months? I think HelioGen's got some great ideas on that. I just call them out. I've seen they're really looking at that problem in a very innovative way. We do not plan on pursuing another CSP plant at that time. This is an interview we had, and it made me think, this is my words, it's not 2010, right? So the incentives and the market have moved on from when that looked like a viable idea. And so I think that understanding the viability, I think that's our goal, right? Let's get down to 5 cents. Let's get down to an LCOE that is competitive without incentives, and that is what we've been working on. So I think we're on the right track there. There's mentioned that medium term is interesting. We may not be able to compete on the 4-year battery scale as well, but the 8-hour period when you have to shift an entire, population the size of California to 8 hours, that's a lot of batteries. So I think we still have a good opportunity there. And then synchronous loading. The base load is synchronous, and so there's still some opportunities there to be competitive with other deployments, and I think those are the opportunities. So the mindset of investors. How much money, how much risk, what's the schedule until I get a return on my investment? So $1 billion is very high risk, right? By the time you get all the institutions lined up, the market has moved on. And so it was said that projects in the $200 to $300 million range are the sweet spot. So go small, get deployable with small modules that can meet any spec. One person said that 10 megawatt system is the best one to optimize. So years of zero revenue because of technical because technical solutions were difficult to find. Modular layouts would prevent these single points of failure. These are some stories for some plants that were not producing for years while key components were being repaired. And so that single point of failure still has a legacy that I think we need to make a reliability case and say, look, we've got, 2-point failures, right? Let's get that multiplier there and reduce a lot of that risk. Is your EPC properly capitalized to stay long-term, and will they commit no matter what? This is really where the EPC and the developer can be the same entity and say, yeah, we're in it no matter what, but we're also big enough to handle it. If something doesn't go right, we're not gonna pull out. And I think that's important for investors. Mindset of developers. I'm a little embarrassed because I think there's a lot of developers on this call, so I won't speak for everyone, but I will say this is some of the conversations we had. Optimal heliostat size. There's still no consensus on optimal size. We used to think that the correct heliostat was the largest thing you could fit on a pile, right? Because they were looking to reduce those per heliostat costs. But now a lot of these small single facet heliostats are looking really promising. And so it has to really be a game changer technology, right? If we're talking about a $10 watertight connector on 100,000 heliostats, that's not going to work. But if you're really changing the design, the fundamentals, I think there's a really interesting opportunity there. It's also a lot more deployable to get those times down. So I look forward to learning more about that. The optimal field size. I like this quote: "Don't get too caught up in the cents." I think that we, as engineers, we have a mandate to look at how do we get the LCOE down? How do we get that cost per meter square down? And so the LCOE is, we're looking for that 5 cents per kilowatt hour. But if you have something that's going to be faster deployed, something that's a lot more reliable, something that it's just got the right investment, people can say, yeah, let's do it. I think even if it's a little bit higher, I think that might be more desirable to some of the utilities that we spoke to. The supply chain. So this was kind of an interesting insight about how developers form these relationships with people on these components, right? And so if there's suddenly this decision says, hey, let's go from a large heliostat to a medium, or let's change the heliostat from this one to this one, it's hard to break those relationships. And so going in, really thinking about the supply chain and how do you, remain flexible to get the best design before getting too wed to a technology is one of the advice points I got there. Quality control. So we wrote contracts that had teeth and thought that was good enough. And so this is kind of speaking to the idea of, it's hard to know what to measure, right? So you say, you get this shipment of facets and a shipment of drives in, and you say, well, yeah, we got it. But if you don't know what you're really looking for after the whole thing is assembled, it's very difficult to enforce it. And so when the technology is still developing, it's just a managed risk, right? How do we, there's no answer to that. It's just, maybe we can come up with better ways of inspecting, receiving, so that we know the assembly is going to work out. Site preparation. This is something I'm proposing. This came from our workshop. There were some developers said we don't pave the field. Others say, yeah, we go to full asphalt. And so the thought was, what if we didn't prepare the field at all? So the pros might be reduced costs. It preserves habitats in the environment. There were a lot of the opposition groups I mentioned above were talking about how they think it's environmentally destructive to plow their land, right? They see it as a scar on the land. And so, preserving that land would be a good PR move, as well as reducing costs. The vegetation may reduce erosion, was one of the things that came out of our workshop. Also may reduce airborne dust, right? These plants, they somehow have figured out how to live in these habitats, so they hold down the dust, and that's important, and that can reduce washing costs. And the other thing is, taking the Ivanpah as the example, if you have unkempt land, it's hard to do it, hard to clean with a truck. So they use people who live in the community there, and they come out and wash the windows. And I think that kind of relationship makes it desirable for the government incentives. It makes it more desirable to the community living next to these plants. Assembly and construction. This was a point was made that the EPCs like to say, okay, here's your construction requirements. We will build to this, and we will check off the list. And developers are still saying, wow, we kind of want to try something different here. How's that going? And EPCs don't like to engage a lot of times with the developers, but understanding that the technology is developing, it is new. And so sometimes when the EPC is the developer, that is one of the better relationships, versus trying to have these checkpoints when you don't know what you're looking for. End of life cycle. So the default system in SAM was run. I ran it with a 25 and a 35-year life. I mentioned that. It was about half a cent, which equates to about $3 per meter squared. And so this kind of brings up the idea of life extension programs. So Solar One was a small project in the early 80s, and then they refurbished it in the late 90s. But I think that really gives a blueprint for what a successful life extension program could look like. And it kind of gives us a little bit of a cost basis. I haven't dug into it yet, but if I could get that data, I would try to see, could we put that up front as part of the plan? Also, postmortem, what can we do beyond the power cycle, right? And so Solar 2 there's some interesting research where they used it as a giant telescope, right? You've got a huge field of mirrors, and they did some gamma radiation studies. I thought that was interesting for a couple of years. More of that could be developed. Also, ecotourism. There's a lot of people who are interested in saving the world, believe it or not, and they would love to see this. I put a picture here because if anybody's ever driven, I live in New Mexico, so it's west for us, but I drive west to Arizona or California, and I thought it was interesting. I know the thing, there's probably 50 signs telling me the thing. So I think Dragoon, Arizona, that community gets more people going to their gas station than Daggett does to see the world's first large scale commercial solar plant. So I think there's some really good opportunities there for capitalizing and putting that up front, and adding it up as to, what kind of gigs can we pick up, but also removal and recycling. I think that's the big thing there. If we wind up with a bunch of broken mirrors sitting on rusty metal, it's not going to look good for the industry. It's going to make it harder to get through some of these opposition groups. And so recycling of the glass and trying to remove these needs to be part of the plan up front. And I think there's a lot of good ways to do that. So look forward to that. Anyway, the path forward, I think that CSP still has a major role in the renewable energy portfolio. It is 24-hour synchronous base loading source. It's long-term storage and midterm storage, and it's thermal energy and industrial process heat. I think those are really great new. They feel new to me, but I guess it's kind of not as new. But it's a reemphasis on the heat applications. I wanted to say that I do think cost targets may be possible with a combination of strategies. So increase learning, right? Get through that permitting pitfalls by getting these communities engaged early. And reduce investor anxiety by removing single points of failure and that $1 billion price tag, perhaps chop it up into smaller deployments. Reduce utility risk by deploying at least partially in the 6 to 12 month area. And that would match the PV and match the PV reliability, right? So just drop and go, right? It needs to be that simple. And that's really what HelioCon is here to do. So that's our mandate over the next 5 years is to get that kind of thing understood. And then investing in PR, right? That's not necessarily something that's under our scope, but I put it out there because I know a lot of people may have that role in reporting and talking about this. Community informed solutions, right? That's working with communities to say, how would this impact you? What would make it better, more beneficial? Okay, now we're interested in working together, and now we're ready for a proposal that should it come up. And I think their proposals are more likely to come up when people are wanting this to happen. The second category was designing heliostats for ease of deployments. This is minimizing foundations, minimizing the labor it takes to put them on the ground, and minimizing the infrastructure, right? That could be ground prep, but it's also trenching, wiring, et cetera. And also reducing the cost of the field and O&M, right? So leaving the ground pristine is a way of actually, maybe helping to reduce costs, both in O&M and the setup costs. Okay, that is my last slide. I'd just like to thank the Solar Energy Technology Office for funding HelioCon. Andrew Prescott is our manager, and a special thanks to Charles Deep, Brad Hines, Fred Morris, David Kearney, Eric Letts, Parthiv Karup, Chad Augustine, and Mark Mijos for taking the time to speak with us and share your thoughts on the industry. And I would recommend reading their papers too. It's a great paper, plus the best practices report also has a lot of this kind of spelled out in more detail. And their authors are here as well. So I'll send this out with some links to their work as we go. So I have, I'll stop sharing here. And I'd like to just ask if there's any questions from you all. Gerhard.
Oh, I was just applauding. I'm just considering my questions at the moment, but it was not the hand I raised. But nevertheless, now that you mentioned me, I think, thank you very much. I think this was really very many things I completely agree. I wanted to mention, I think, two things. One, of course, as being one of the, let's say, friends and of the stereo heliostats, I would also like to mention that one thing that you mentioned regarding that heliostats should be ready, or that there is a risk that they have been accepted and then they don't work. So one thing that how we try to tackle this is that we do, like we did it in the Harmy plant, that all the concentrators are fully quality assured. So you have 100% deflectometry of all the concentrators before deploying them to the field. And also that the drive system or the pylon head with the drives and the controls is pre-assembled, tested, and then taken to the field, which significantly reduces the risk that afterwards you have some challenges with that. And then also I would like to add, but I think it's maybe stating the obvious, that while dollars or euros per square meter are easy number to compare, in the end, what you would like to know is what is the cost of useful thermal energy on the receiver. And that's a bit more complex to compare, and therefore also optical quality, tracking quality, availability play a role, which makes this comparison between more conceptual heliostat and one that has been commercially deployed a bit, yeah, let's say challenging. Referring to the NREL comparison.
I wanted to mention, I should have said it during the slide, is that there was no optical efficiency used in the Sunring to Stelio comparison, and so I don't think that I don't think one can say that it's an equivalent dollar for dollar comparison. So I was really trying to just isolate things like the foundation, but I think you're right on the top price tag. I think you really can't compare the two without knowing what the optical efficiency is. And I did a similar in my SAM experiments where I was just kind of changing one parameter. I did note that a decrease in optical efficiency is a huge factor. It's on the order of, it's just like having less DNI. And so any decrease in optical efficiency for the expense of a cost reduction is probably not a good idea. And so, yeah, definitely not trying to say that one heliostat is better than the other. And I appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay, sorry for being so a bit, how would you say? Anyway, just I wanted to state this, but fully agree with your comments. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate all your work on the Stelio as well. And I've read a lot of your work. It's fantastic. Any other comments? I really wanted to just kind of put it out there that this is not meant to be a discussion about what we should do or what we will do. This is meant to say, here's some comments that people have made. And then I wanted to kind of get more feedback about whether you see, some of these new market trends as are these reasonable responses? Do you have any ideas, especially technical areas that we could work on as HelioCon? And what your thoughts are on that.
I had a question. So thinking about the site location decisions for these plants, I know a lot of these tend to be in very remote locations because land costs are significantly cheaper there, but then that often has drawbacks of less access to services and things like that, or it's difficult to get more experienced or expertise working at your plant because it's difficult to access the plant and things like that. And then maybe also transmission is more difficult. So I was wondering if you'd come across data or had thoughts on anything that we'd learned by deploying these plants, and whether continue like putting these in these remote locations turns out to be more trouble than it's worth, and or if we have any sort of information on ideal site location.
I did look at so when I was comparing under the thinking of, well, if these plants aren't welcome in rural communities, could we bring them closer to urban communities where maybe they are more welcome? And what I found was that decreasing your solar resource is always going to be a bigger deal than the incentives you might get, right? So the incentives really would have to make maybe a extra 2-3 cents worth of LCOE to justify the move toward more urban communities that I looked at. Someone might know one. I mean, but there's so few in the Southwest, right? Albuquerque, Phoenix, Tucson. None of those areas really were as good as something like Blythe or Daggett. And again, that gets to optical efficiency as well. Like the heliostat itself right? Or the DNI, they kind of have that one-to-one relationship.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, that's, I guess that concludes this seminar. Rebecca, do you want to go ahead and display the next one coming up?
Yeah, we'll do. And yeah, and Jeremy's contact information is on the flyer that was sent out with the calendar invite. So if you think of anything that you want to ask later, follow up, you can feel free to do that. I'll share my screen real quick. If I can figure out how to do that. Huh. 1 second. Sorry, I'm not seeing it. I think, oh, there we go. All right. Okay. All right, so our next seminar is going to be in May. So this is going to be in May 18th, and we'll have another speaker from Sandia National Labs. This time we'll have Dr. Ken Armijo, who will be giving a talk on heliostat components and controls, which is the topic that he's leading. So that'll be on a Wednesday again, 1 to 2 p.m. on Wednesday, May 18th. And then for following up on the HelioCon seminar series, so as I mentioned, our past seminar presentations are available on our NREL YouTube learning channel, linked here. And so I'll also, once I send the slides out, you'll have that, and then hopefully you'll be able to access that. Sometimes there's a bit of a delay before these get posted, or between when we have the seminar when they get posted, because we have to do a little work to transcribe them and things like that. But these will all be up there. If you are not on our list receiving the emails for the seminar, or and wish to subscribe, or if you know of others, colleagues or students who would like to receive information about this, you can contact our HelioCon email, so heliostat.consortium@nrel.gov, to get added to that list. Yeah, thanks again for tuning in to our seminar, and thanks to our speaker, Jeremy. That was a really interesting talk. Got us thinking about lots of things that maybe we don't always think about in regards to field deployment. So thank you for those insights.
Thank you. Okay, then we'll adjourn. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.